Hey everyone, I'm Trent Kusters, co-founder and studio director at League of Geeks, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today we've got a bit of a different episode for you. Usually I'm on here talking to folks about their hit new video game and how they got into games or something. But today we're talking about a very different set of challenges. Today we're talking to Alex Nichiporchik, the CEO and founder of tinyBuild, a global independent developer and publisher who, up until about February this year, had about 200 of their workforce based in Ukraine and Russia. We're talking today about how Alex and his team mobilized and evacuated all of those team members out of both Ukraine and Russia. It's an absolutely fascinating conversation where we discuss logistical challenges, financial challenges, emotional challenges, cultural challenges, and even the challenges of somehow supporting a multiplayer games as a service title whilst in a war zone. It's an absolutely insightful look into the challenges that developers just like you and I are facing right now in the Russian invasion that's still ongoing. So I hope you find the chat as insightful as I did. Alex is wonderfully vulnerable throughout this, and it's absolutely remarkable what his team has achieved, not to mention other teams in the region. So without further ado, let's have a listen. Thank you for joining us here today, Alex.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been exciting to coordinate so many time zones.
Yeah, I know. I think you're with our producers here on the call. I think we were saying it's definitely the collect them all of time zones for sure on this one. I think, this is a bit of a different episode, as I just mentioned in my intro to the ep, but I think a really great way to begin this is for those folks who somehow in the games industry worldwide have not seen an orange hat, somehow still to this day, it might be good to actually just let folks know who tinyBuild is and who you are. Let's dive into that for a second.
Yeah, sure. So if you see infuriatingly orange hats at GDC or Gamescom or PAX, it's probably us. We're tinyBuild. The short version is we're about 11 years old, depending on how you count right now. Started out as just two guys making games in our bedrooms, indie games as they were called back then, and we kind of had this journey of spending a couple of years on developing our very first game, right? And then being lucky enough to have it take off and justify going full time. So then for almost a decade, we've spent investing into game development companies all over the world and helping essentially co-develop and publish games, right? So we were more a traditional publisher for a while, and now we went public last year on the London Stock Exchange and kind of supercharged our growth. Now 400 people, 11 studios, focused on mostly mid-tier console and PC games. And recently heavily investing into things like cross-media, working on animated series. And the reason we're talking about this is because you can probably tell by my accent, we've initially we started out helping a lot of developers from Eastern Europe, from countries like Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. So that's kind of the context of how we got here, from orange hats to talking about Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just dive straight into that now. So you gave a talk at D.I.C.E. Europe this year in August, and hosted in Barcelona by the AIAS. And you spoke about your mass mobilization of your studios and staff across both Ukraine and Russia. And so we're going to be diving into a bit of that today, but I thought it might just be a good idea to actually start off with some of the context of what's going on in Russia this week as this happens. So today is the 28th of November, 2022. So we're coming towards the end of the year. It's starting to get cold in that side of the world as well, which obviously creates issues when there's a full-scale invasion going on. But, just this week alone, Russia's kept up its onslaught on Ukrainian cities. On Saturday, there was an attack on Dnipro, and then recently liberated Kherson as well, as saw residents flee shelling on Sunday. there's also been power outages and inconsistencies, obviously, all across Ukraine during this time. But Ukrainian authorities are restoring power gradually, but still without heat or electricity for millions of people across Ukraine, which obviously, as things get colder in that part of the world, poses a lot more complications. And there are now fears because of this, Russia's targeting of the electricity grid, that it's going to threaten the safety of Ukraine's nuclear power plants as well, which has been an ongoing conversation throughout this. And interestingly, on that note, Russian troops may actually be preparing to leave Zaporizhia, the nuclear power plant there, which they seized in March, just soon after their invasion. And some folks may know here as well, most folks may know, that Russia and Ukraine actually was the site of the world's worst nuclear accident, unfortunately, Chernobyl back in 1986. So it's a very topical thing, and obviously at the forefront of both countries' minds there. Russian forces have suffered heavy casualties during fighting in Ukraine's south-central Donetsk province as well this week. And the UK Ministry of Defence also confirmed that they're sending more missiles to Kyiv as well, likely in response due to Russia's mobilization around that nuclear power grid, perhaps. And then, of course, Zelensky, interestingly, I shouldn't say of course, because it's amazing to hear that things like this are still happening, but President Zelensky just hosted a summit in Kyiv with allied nations on Saturday to launch grain from Ukraine, which is an interesting initiative in the midst of all this, to export over $150 million worth of grain to countries most vulnerable to famine and drought. Obviously, Ukraine has a lot to do with energy in the region and around the world, and then also agricultural nation as well. So its economic impacts are being felt by even folks here in Australia, where I'm recording this from. So there's a lot still happening and a lot of certain uncertainty in the region. But Alex, for you, this started a long time ago, right? Not just this week. So when did you first get the feeling that mobilization? Actually, first question is, how many people did you have in Russia and Ukraine?
In Russia, we had just over 100.
Wow.
In Ukraine, depending on how you count, because we didn't want to leave our subcontractors, right? Our
Yeah, that was going to be my
studios
next
behind.
question.
So Ukraine was 80-ish, something like that.
And you kind of touched on it then, but are these partnered companies, or are they first-party studios of yours?
It's all of the above. It's mostly first-party studios with some contractors attached.
Interesting. Okay. And so when was the first instance of where you and perhaps some of your leadership team started talking seriously about mobilizational plans? I remember I was at, it's interesting, you go to D.I.C.E. and you're talking to people, executives from across the industry, and especially at D.I.C.E. there's a lot of folks who have, who might head up in organizations like Virtuous or others that are providing services to game developers. And a lot of them are in regions like this or other parts of the world. And I remember it was the first place I really heard about, or it caught on for me, how serious COVID was going to be, was talking to developers and publishers and service providers who had developers in the region. And the same thing happened this year at D.I.C.E. in February. And actually, I remember being at dinner, and that's when word in D.I.C.E. in Vegas earlier this year in February, and that's when word of the invasion actually came through. We were all at D.I.C.E. I'm not sure. I can't remember if you were there, Alex.
I was there, but I had to just step away and deal with things that were happening. I mean, for us, it was go ahead.
I was just going to say, let's go back to that as I asked the first instance of you thinking about these things.
So it was right around a year ago, actually, because in at the end of summer last year, that's when the military buildup started happening on the border of Ukraine. Yeah, and if you think about, if you're not going to be prepared to do something, you will not be committing so much resource, right? Because it's very expensive to move military tech like that to house all of these people. And at one point, we started to realize that this is not just going to be for exercising, because if you think about from an RTS standpoint where you manage resources, like if this was StarCraft, if this was a PvP match, you would be probably preparing for something, right?
Yeah,
and the question was, Yeah, the question was when, because fighting and doing an invasion in like the end of the year is very risky in that region because this year is getting colder sooner, so the ground will freeze up sooner. But last year it was a little bit warmer, so you don't want to get stuck in the mud, right? That's just like a well-known fact about that
Interesting.
whole
Yeah.
region because the ground is mud essentially. It turns to mud for quite a while for a large part of the year. And I think the panic really started to set in my mind in the middle of January when I think it was Biden that said something that was quoted like that a minor incursion will be,
Is
like
fine.
essentially don't bite off like a large chunk, right?
Yeah.
And to me, what that did is it set off alarm bells because if I was in Russia and in the military and reading that, I would be like, okay, guys, let's go, right? They're
That's
afraid.
time. Yeah. Yeah.
Showing fear in that situation or giving the perception of fear was what made me think, okay, now everyone get on the call. It was like a Friday night, 1 a.m. local time. Everyone's already at the bar and essentially all of our Ukrainian leadership. So I got everyone together and we just started talking like through deep into the night of what might happen because
Mm.
what I also realized that we would not be able to have an objective, non-emotional conversation if shit was already hitting the fan. And I'm not sure if I can
Right.
swear on this podcast, but we
You
can
can
leave it for
swear.
it.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Right. So if shit is hitting the fan, that's when people are irrational, and that's when you really want to have a solid plan that you thought about when you were non-emotional, right?
Yes.
So during the night, we opened up the map, did some screen sharing, and we're like, okay, well, from a game theory perspective,
Mm.
if this was Civ, if this was StarCraft, what would the other side attempt to do?
Yeah.
Well, we realized that everyone was saying that the attack from the north from Belarus on Kiev is unlikely, but let's just hypothesize. So we
Mm.
realized that it was going to be super important to essentially be prepared to go away from Kiev to Lviv via the
Mm.
south. Right, so that you would need
Yep.
to go south and then to the west. The reason being that there was a strategic point, which is the Zhytomyr airport. It's not the main airport of Kiev, but it's on the left side of the bank. So if you
Okay.
were going up from the north, that is where you would probably need to make a base of operations to fly in military equipment because the range on the tanks, if you go from the border with Belarus, is not enough to get into Kiev. So they
Yep.
would need to make like a base of operations somewhere. So that means that going to that left bank would be traffic jams, extremely dangerous, and we would need to have flexibility.
Mhm.
So that was one of the first considerations. Then we realized that fuel is going to be scarce, water,
Mhm.
heated clothing, connection
And
is going to
Alex,
be
just
also.
a
Yeah.
moment. Who are these people that you're like? Who on your team are you talking to about this? Like, who had you gathered?
Yes, so we have a studio in Lviv called Holograph. They had made a Secret Neighbor, which is a
Yeah.
multiplayer spin-off of one of our main franchises.
Mhm.
So we had Max and Sergey, which were the co-leads of that studio. Then
Mhm.
we had a subcontractor that was doing a whole bunch of animation work for many of our projects. They were in
Yep.
Kiev.
Mhm.
Then we had the team lead of a game called D.I.C.E, which was also in Kiev. And we had a few people who were kind of like team leads, but spread out around Ukraine.
Mm.
And we essentially divided everyone into groups where we would have a lead responsible, well, quote unquote, responsible for those people, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Um, so that when we need to check in to make sure that someone is on their way or needs assistance, then we would have these team leads that would phone them by whatever means necessary,
Yep.
and then report back with the status.
Yep. Because at this point, you're already thinking about everyone, right? Because you're talking through these hypotheticals, and 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 I guess through the context at this point, had you decided that if this happens, it has to be everyone? It's an all or nothing thing, or was there conversation about who's staying, who wouldn't? Was it a bit of waiting to see the scale of the invasion? Was that part of something that you're working through in your hypotheticals?
Um, so in the conversations, it was very difficult to tell everyone that, hey, this is going to be like massive relocation because everyone has like their apartments, their families, and whatnot.
Yeah, their whole
Um,
lives.
yeah. Whereas with people on the western side in Lviv, we prepared for everyone. So that meant getting apartments ready, getting like mattresses, like blankets, all of the humanitarian aid you can have.
Hmm.
So it we had to prepare for the worst, and then we knew that it was going to be critical to get women and children out of the country
Hmm.
because the country would lock itself, right? If you're a young man without 3 kids or over, you would not be able to leave the country.
Yeah.
So it was multi-step. Our people in Europe were already prepared to essentially go to the Polish border and pick everyone up,
Right.
or assist in whichever way they could. So it was getting the women and children out, and getting everyone else into Lviv and setting everyone up in a comfortable way.
Yes. Yes, of course. And so these hypotheticals that you were going through in regards to like how it may go down. How far did you go with those? Like, I mean, you spoke us through, the airport just, north of Kyiv on the left side of the bank there. But how many, how many of these sort of hypothetical invasions did you run through, and did you actually get close? Was there a plan that you had prepared, a contingency plan that was close to what actually happened?
Well, we had kind of like three basic versions. One was that there was going to be some fighting in the Donbass region, which was annexed occupied in 2014. We
Yep.
had like a mid plan where it would just go from east to west,
Hmm.
and from the south from Crimea, and then we had the code black, as we called it, is like okay, Kiev is under attack. This is going to be a full on invasion. And when we were at Dice at that point, right? I was also
Yes.
saying at dinner, and then I got the code black message, and I just remember like, going into like fading into this haze of stress, adrenaline, and just locking myself in the hotel room, opening up a bottle of something very strong, and just for 3 days, just sleeping in intervals of a couple of hours and just checking in with people to make sure that things were going right. And I mean, the biggest challenge, oddly enough, was financial, in the way
Yeah.
that people don't really think about like, okay, well, what if your cards stop working, right? Like, what if you don't have your credit card tomorrow? What if your bank card is useless? What if you can't get cash from the ATM?
Yeah.
So
And
that's when
you're
we had
talking
to,
for your team, I guess, their own personal cards
yeah,
and things,
yeah,
right? Yeah. Helping them
yeah.
financially. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had
Mm.
to kind of innovate on what would payments look like, and that is what I believe really saved everyone when it did hit the fan, because we were able to use a lot of local payment providers, with like peer to peer, kind of like a Ukrainian version of PayPal, essentially.
Yeah.
That saved us a lot. And then just having everyone coordinated in groups like a battalion,
Mm.
when information that is relevant to like people in this region gets propagated in an accurate way, that was really helpful. So, for
Hmm.
example, getting fuel, because the trip from Kiev to Lviv is about 600 kilometers,
Yep.
and that's 350, 400 miles for
And for our
everyone who,
listeners here, Lviv is west of Kiev,
yeah.
so about 400 kilometers west of Kiev.
Yeah. So that trip, you need to have a full tank of fuel, but
Mm.
fuel was the one thing that became scarce.
Of
So
course.
coordinating when, like, okay, here's this gas station that's giving out X amount of gallons per person, right?
Hmm.
That kind of stuff really helped us.
Right. Sending multiple people down to actually get the
Mhm.
amount of fuel that you need. And so, how much had you prepared before you received, you're at Dice and you received that code black message? Like, what was actually already stockpiled or ready to go? The battalions, I imagine you'd already set up, but you're learning other things like the payments and stuff along the way. What was there in
So
regards to an infrastructure?
we've uh, we've rented a few properties, but not enough, as it turned out. So we were essentially ready to start, well, kind of like renting, right?
In the west of
Because
Ukraine?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
in around the Kyiv region. So we had a few apartments, we had stockpiles of food, and it just so happened that the studio Holograph, that was the same week that they were moving offices, right? And instead of breaking the lease on the old office, we got lucky. It was kind of like this apartment, like like a 2-story tall apartment that was used as an office. So they didn't break the lease on that, and then used that as temporary shelter, and prep that for people to be able to come in and be able to be safe, warm, and have a shower.
Yeah.
So the preparation was mostly on like the humanitarian stuff.
Hmm. Did you have team members that lost their homes that were displaced due to shelling or anything like that?
We had people who were in the blast radiuses.
Yeah, wow.
Fortunately, no one has lost their actual apartment buildings or their apartments, but um, it's difficult because unlike in the US or in many Western countries, in Ukraine you will typically own your real estate. It's a bigger conversation because
Yeah.
yes, today many younger people will take out mortgages, but there will be apartments like passed on to you, right? So you will actually
Yes.
own
Okay.
it.
Intergenerationally.
Yes.
Yes. Gotcha.
Yes, and many people just felt like super terrible about leaving their livelihoods behind, right?
Yeah, I can
So
imagine.
yeah, so people that came to Lviv in the first 3 months, and we're just recounting all of these events because it's still a little bit hazy, right?
Yes.
But it
No
was
doubt.
a race against time to get people an apartment, get people what they need, get the people that can leave to the border, right? Because that was also critical because we didn't know how bad it would escalate and how fast. So there were lines of tens of kilometers of people just trying to get out into Poland.
So let's actually talk about that in a timeline
Mhm.
sense, Alex. So you mentioned you get the code black message, you've got stuff ready to go, you've got places rented in Kiev, you know that you're heading to Lviv for some of the folks. You've got concerns about some of your male employees not being able to leave the country, or getting the women and children out as fast as you possibly can. What is that timeline? Can you break us down over those first few days of taking these approximately 100 folks and 80 to 100 folks in Ukraine and
Mhm.
mobilizing them? Like how fast did that happen and how successful was it?
So the majority was able to mobilize within a day, right? So within the first
Mm.
24 hours. And most people will have either taken
Mhm.
their cars to Lviv, or were on the first evacuation trains.
Yeah.
Now, we did have a few people that got extremely unfortunate in terms of the timeline because one of the significant others of studio leads, she went to see her parents and was supposed to leave the day before of the invasion, but got COVID.
Mhm.
So she had to stay there
Ah,
for a few days. And this was in Kharkiv, which had heavy shelling in the beginning.
oh
So
no.
that was mildly terrifying. Um, Other, difficulties came from just some people who, couldn't leave, right? Who
Mm.
had like immobilized parents or things like that.
Mhm.
So the timeline is really like the majority of the movement happened in the first day. Then the next few days was when people who couldn't immediately move, we were like they were catching on to
Yeah.
to getting out. And then in some regions that weren't as affected immediately, people decided to stay and help out however they can for the Ukrainian army and just general humanitarian aid to people who can't take care of themselves.
Yeah, I can imagine. We're talking about mobilizing and evacuation, but I imagine for some of them, whether it be, you know, even if they don't have to stay, there must have been an urge for some of your team to actually stick around, whether it be, to fight, or whether it be to actually, volunteer themselves in various ways. Was that a conversation that you had with folks leading up to the invasion as well, or was that something that sort of just came about in the moment? Those who chose to stay.
We attempted to have conversations, but essentially we took a very top-down approach. Well, light sensor, so the camera will just a second. We've had a lot of conversations, but the approach was very top-down. Like, hey, you have to do this, right? Like, just do what you're told based on this information, which is maybe not the nicest approach. But for example, for one of our employees from a slightly remote region in Ukraine, what happened is he was already in the process of relocating to the Netherlands, to our Dutch office, and he wanted to postpone receiving his documents because he just wanted to hang out and whatnot. We're like, no, you have your documents ready. You go to Kyiv right now. You pick them up. I believe it was a Monday that he picked it up. And on that Tuesday, he left the country on like random flights. Like we're like, okay, just get on any flight anywhere.
Just go.
And because of that, he's over half a year right now. Since February, he's here in the Netherlands and not stuck, in the cold. But not everyone was as fortunate or was able to do that. But let's just talk more about the people that we could extract, right? Because there was a whole operation there, right? So I mentioned this guy that we were able to extract right before the war, but our head of HR, she was in Kyiv in a similar situation, supposed to get the documents on February 23rd, the day before the invasion. And right around that same time, all of the embassies started closing. So you can imagine that she's there with her husband and a 2-year-old daughter waiting for these documents that never come. And her story is really fascinating because then she went back to one of the areas that she lived in, and there was shelling a lot. And she was at the core of coordinating all of this. And as soon
director of HR globally as well, right? Director of HR.
Yeah. So she spent 3 months there doing this, and then finally was able to find a way to get to the border with Poland, where we picked her up and got to the Netherlands. But what happened with her husband, because they have one kid, right? He stayed there for until August, where in August he was able to somehow miraculously drive down to Crimea, right? Get accepted to Crimea, right? Somehow, then drive the long way around through the Crimean Bridge to Russia, all the way to St. Petersburg, and then enter the European Union through the Baltic states.
Wow.
And we're like listening to that story, like, holy shit. So now, anyway, long story short, they're now happy in the Netherlands. And we've had many people like that from different subsidiaries move. It was at one point in Latvia, we've had close to 10 people. Just like my parents had this Airbnb business, which we shut down and just housed everyone. In the Netherlands, we have this, by Dutch standards, it's a large house. It's like 3 bedrooms, right? So we just filled it to the brim with people before we were able to find more permanent housing. And it was like, not going through shelling, but imagine just receiving a lot of people and just getting everyone situated, right?
Yeah, of course. Which is, in a way, for folks involved, is traumatic in and of itself. You may not be being shelled, but you're still feeling the effects of the war, of the invasion. Absolutely. And I remember a note from your D.I.C.E Europe talk that Olga was doing all of this, evacuating everyone, and with the situation with her husband and her child and her own situation, whilst running the entire company's hiring processes as well.
Yeah, they somehow hired over 20 people during all of that, right?
Wow.
But it's super. Mm-hmm.
That's a question, interestingly, to while all this is happening, whilst we're still in this timeline of these evacuations happening out of Ukraine and people, having to do these incredible things to get to safety, and the mobilization of your team and the organization of that. What was the environment like for your studios in the Netherlands or in Seattle, or folks based around the world? And like, you're a global workforce, right? Like, walk me through a bit of what this was like for folks outside of Russia or Ukraine.
Well, so most people understood what was happening, right? And many people were involved on our back-end operations, just making sure that the priorities are met. Because I said the priorities, like preservation of life, is first and foremost. So any decision you make that may impact life is more important than anything, right? And
Right.
then
So you had
business,
explicitly laid
yeah,
out these priorities in order. Okay, amazing. So top is priority of life, save lives at all
yeah.
costs, essentially. Yep.
Yeah, save lives, and then second was reactive. Something is life-threatening to the business, right? Then take care of your employees, and then it just went down that way.
Yep.
But what this really did in the whole midst of it, because a lot of people then that weren't involved in the Ukraine side of things were involved on the Russian extraction side of things, right? Because we had a lot of people in Russia that we want to extract, and that whole process intermixed with what was happening in Ukraine really showed a lot of like true nature of people. It's kind of interesting because from a psychology perspective, you will see exactly who is who in a high stress, high stakes situation. And
Yep.
that was fascinating for me, at least to observe. It's kind of like when you watch movies and then like people are dumped on an island and need to survive and show their true nature.
Their true
This was
character. Yeah.
happening. So we've out of that we learned a lot in terms of whom you can trust, because you can. This was literally a life and death situation, and the people that stepped up, they're going to have really great careers. It's like there are a few people who have shown that they are the most reliable, the most responsive people in the world that will. Like no matter where they end up with us or anywhere else, they will have great careers. They will build great teams. And then we had to make organizational changes as well, because a lot of these processes are similar to, in a way, to game development, where you have a lot of dependencies coming together, right? Like, it's just that if someone doesn't file a bug in Jira, okay, the game might get delayed or might have a bug. Here, if someone doesn't file a ticket that they have reserved a flight or misspelled someone's last name, we may not have a person working with us.
Yeah. The
So the stakes are.
but like the process is the same or similar in a way. And so, it's interesting you talking about people going on to have great careers. You mean in the sense, in that you watch people that operate with a calm clarity in these types of situations and are able to move through it, even when the stakes are bumped up. They are able to actually move through it, just like you may see them problem solve across the team working on a video game.
Exactly. People whom you can rely on, because whenever
Yeah.
you build a team, it's always a little bit of a gamble if a person is going to work out or not, right? And then the
Yep.
greatest team members, if you can, like right now, I know with 100% certainty whom we can rely on.
Yeah. I bet it's the test that no one ever wanted to have to run, right? But interestingly, you got
But
that extraordinary chance.
not everyone passed that test, right? That's the interesting part. And
So,
yeah.
sorry, continue, please. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to say that sometimes people who are, who get into positions where they have a little bit of influence in the company, and maybe ended up there by accident or by managing
Fortuitous
upwards, or
outcomes. Yeah.
yes, when the test came, some people didn't pass, and because of that, we now know whom we can rely on.
Interesting. So now I want to go back to this mobilization before we go over to Russia, because obviously I imagine it's a whole different approach. It's fascinating, how you must have gone about that and the logistics there, because it's completely different in a sense. But you've moved and mobilized all these people to Lviv in the first day for the majority of them. What happens once they're in Lviv? Like, were you trying to get folks out of Ukraine via the Polish border? Did you have a base of operations there? Did people sort of just get to work and continue living out their lives, hoping to return to Kyiv at some point in time? I mean, we obviously had no idea at that point in time how long this would be going on for, that we'd be here in November potentially still talking about it. What happened once that mobilization found itself in Lviv?
So when people landed in Lviv, the people who could leave, we would facilitate them to go to the border, right?
Yep. Okay.
To go into Poland and then to one of our European locations.
Mhm.
For everyone else, I mentioned that we had rented a new office for CEO Holograph,
Mhm.
and the size of it was like for growth, right? So everyone
Yep.
who landed in Lviv had an office suddenly, and after 2 years of working remotely, it kind of was unexpectedly a positive feeling
Yeah.
because many people haven't met and now they live together, right? After working for a couple of years, that's a bonding experience. And then it was relatively calm in Lviv during that time, so people would go off to work, right, and
Yep.
have water cooler conversations despite everything going on. It was a positive team building experience. But you're right that many people were like, okay, well, I want to go home as soon as it's quote unquote
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah. So there definitely was that. Obviously, as you said, with these intergenerational homes and people's lives still in a place, I can relate to that. Now, it can seem a bit cold to talk about this next question that I'm about to ask, considering the stakes of what's going on and a full scale invasion. But you are running a business at the end of the day, and you've got these other people working over it. Like, how actually was this? First question I have is, like, how was this financed? Were you just digging into the coffers for this? Were you just digging into, and just, obviously it doesn't matter, as you say, save life at all costs? Were there organizations or NFPs or anything that were helping you out?
So this was all self-funded. We knew that we couldn't put a price tag on people's lives, right?
Yeah.
And so far we've spent just a little bit over $1 million of like excess
Yep.
spending that would not be like normally done. But yeah,
Which
it
is
was all.
nothing really when you think about the stakes of what's
Yeah,
going on. Like, you pay that again probably 5 times over.
yeah,
Yeah.
probably in terms of just team morale and the loyalty that you get by doing these kind of things. But
Mm.
it's not been about funding because we had recently gone public at that point, right?
Yes, I remember.
So
Yeah.
and the markets were doing quite well, so we knew that we had backup options should push comes to shove.
Yeah.
But in the end, like in the first half of the year at least, we didn't even do an exception for that $1 million because the business, despite everything, did really, really well. So we just took that $1 million, loss and
Mhm.
absorbed it and didn't really feel it.
Yeah, it's such a fortunate situation to be in. I imagine there's been so many organizations that not only may not have had the capacity to support their employees, and their team members to this degree, but would have put them out of business when they chose to do so. Okay, and so you were talking about morale and things like that, and these folks actually now going and getting a chance to work together in Lviv when they may not have before. What were you? How many games did you have? Were these teams working on at this point in time? I mean, you've got these folks in Kiev. Was that, you mentioned the holograph team? What other teams were working away here?
Well, the key products that were being worked on there was Secret Neighbor, which is our game as a service multiplayer
Hmm.
tile,
Yep.
and during this whole process, we were able to definitely not smuggle dev kits for all consoles to all of the console
We
platforms
did not
listening.
do
We did
that. No.
not
Yeah.
do that, no,
Yeah.
but somehow they ended up there in
Yeah.
Lviv,
Miraculous. Yeah.
and yeah, and we were able to set up a pipeline for the team to develop for all platforms at once. Because typically, teams of our size, like 20, 30 people, they
Hmm.
will depend on external porting, and we really didn't
Hmm.
like that. So, as
Yeah.
all of this is happening, the team is playing around with dev kits, figuring out how to deploy to them, learning all of the cert requirements, and in just a couple of weeks ago, we were able to roll out the first patch that rolled out to all platforms for that game from within
Incredible.
Lviv.
Wow.
So that's quite a challenge. And then the second big project being worked on there is Deadside, which is also a
Mhm.
game as a service. It's kind of like DayZ meets
Yeah.
PUBG, I
Okay.
guess, in an
Yep.
open world. And the team lead of that is in Kyiv, and
Mhm.
over like since the beginning of the war, he has been responsible for bringing that game to a whole new level. And in the evenings and on the weekends, he's welding military equipment together and helping the armed forces.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it's definitely like takes your mind off game development, I guess. But
Yeah.
those are the two big projects that are being developed in Ukraine.
Did you find that actually getting things set up and keeping, I imagine some leaders, doing this for their team, they might have just been like, don't worry about the games, blah, blah, blah. Did you find that the team actually needed the games or needed something to sort of keep their minds, everyone processes things in different ways. Did you find that they wanted to actually just dive straight into things again and get some of that normalcy back to their life, or a distraction perhaps?
Um, it in a high stress situation when you don't have control over what's going on, right? You
Mm.
really need to do something where you can feel accomplishment, right?
Yeah.
So getting back to work was what everyone wanted because, like you said, it's a distraction from what's going on. And when
Yeah.
you have a level of control over the events in that part of your life, it brings a
Mm.
sense of calm internally, right?
Yes, of course.
So we were really advocating for everyone to take time and whatnot, but everyone just
Yeah.
dove back into work.
Okay. Now, let's actually flip to the other side of things. So Code Black happens, we'll go back to DICE. You're actually, no, let's go all the way back, right? Because you're talking about hypothesizing and looking
Mhm.
at the map with your studio heads in Ukraine and stuff, and you're thinking, okay, if this happens, you've got these three major, scenarios that could go down and planning for them. But whilst you're planning for all of this, you still have 100 odd developers in Russia. So, what were the conversations and what was the planning at that point in January when you start first having these chats about your Russian employees and the whole Russian side of things?
Yeah, so to be honest, that was a consideration that was second priority, right?
Mhm.
And when we figured out what to do, like in that last week of February with Ukraine,
Mhm.
um, we had a basic idea, which was research on visas. Because with the Russian passport, what many people don't realize with like passport from the UK or the US is that it's not possible to travel. Like
There's not many places you can go. Yeah.
yeah, so you can't
Especially
really
settle as well, right, Alex? Like I've got a
yeah.
I've got a
Mhm.
best friend whose partner is Russian, and it's just like they move around from place to place because it's hard for them to find a place to settle.
Yeah, you can't get a residency permit in many places. So we were like, okay, it cannot be an ex-Soviet country. That
Mm.
was consideration number one because at one point, if there would be partial mobilization of civilians, to
Right, of
conscribe them,
course.
then there would be a huge wave there. But
Mhm.
i an ex-Soviet country is still a risk factor, right? And then we've seen that with the rise in Kazakhstan earlier this year and a few other
Mhm.
things that were happening. So no ex-Soviet country needs to accept Russian passports, and
Mhm.
it needs to be continentally, as in territorially, detached from Russia. And there
Right.
were
Okay.
not that many options outside of the Bahamas, which sounds nice, but logistically getting everyone to the Bahamas would be a nightmare, and hurricanes.
Yeah.
But we ended up on Serbia because Serbia is very like Russian passport friendly.
Mhm.
It's also significantly more westernized than any of the ex post-Soviet republics.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that was about it. So
There's a good game
mhm,
dev and VFX scene there as well, right?
mhm,
Already. Yeah.
yep. So when we pulled the plug on, okay, guys, now everyone leave your country. Where are you going? We don't know yet. Probably Serbia. How? We don't know yet. Just pack your bags, get to the airport. It was
Mhm.
literally like that with everyone from Russia because we knew that at any point conscription might happen,
Right.
and that all of the airlines that were previously operating in Russia, this is like the great exodus, right? It's the weeks when all of the companies started to shut down in Russia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So flights were getting canceled in real time. Countries were changing their entry requirements in real time. And for everyone that was able to, well, just pick up their suitcase, we said, just go. So people
Yeah.
would come to the airport, not knowing which flight they would be on. We would have a central unit coordinating, okay, this flight doesn't look like it's going to get canceled. We have a ticket for you here. Just fly, like, fly to Turkey, fly to
Mhm.
Georgia, fly to Armenia, to other countries. And that was like step one. Step one is get out anywhere, right?
Mhm.
Step two was, okay, now you have a hotel for a week. Take a breather, go to the beach or something, and then we'll figure it out. So
Yeah.
that
Okay.
was really sporadic. It was much less planned because we didn't know that we would have to think this far ahead. And that was when just like thinking in real time and solving problems as they come along
Mhm.
helped a lot. And
Mhm.
when we landed in Serbia, we had a few people just started doing rapid research. And the temporary solution was that you could stay there for 30 days with a Russian passport, and then you could leave for 1 day and come back the next day, and then it would reset the visa
Right.
for 30
Okay.
days.
Was
So a
there a
few people
limit
had,
on how many times you could do that, or could you just sort of jump back and forth every
yeah,
time?
don't worry about the
Yeah.
that's
No one's checking.
what we were
Yeah.
told. Um,
Yeah.
So then
Figure it
we
out.
set up a company there, figured out how to open up bank accounts, get
Mhm.
people residency permits, started
Mhm.
renting a whole bunch of apartments, and now it's up to a point where we have an office in
Yeah.
Belgrade, like official tinyBuild Belgrade.
And is this still a sort of all hands on deck? People are just helping out however they can initiative, or do you have like a global operations head that is doing this stuff usually anyway for when someone moves to a country, a new hire, or is this Olga again? Who's actually renting these places and talking to embassies or all of this sort of stuff?
So it definitely Olga's department there has a hand,
Hmm.
and locally, one of our producers who is like responsible for producing several games,
Hmm.
he also kind of organically became the producer on site. You know,
Yeah. Okay.
make a
Right.
game or make a bunch of residency permits. What's the difference, right? So
Yeah.
Vladimir, he's been really really helping out there, and
Yeah.
um, these kind of roles, you can't hire for them. People just
No.
grow into them organically in the midst of it.
Yeah. So, pointed question for you is when this happened, so you've mobilized folks in Ukraine and now you look to your crews in Russia. Was this a decision when you were like, let's get everyone out of Russia, everyone's got to go? Was this a business and political decision in regards to tinyBuild does not want to support Russia? We don't want to invest in Russia anymore, like a lot of countries, as we just mentioned, sorry, a lot of companies, as we just mentioned, were doing? Or was it, and then that had the added impact of, well, shit, we've got to mobilize everyone? Or had you decided before that point, before there was even anything sort of political or a business motivation, were you like, these people are our own and it doesn't matter that they're the aggressor, there is a risk of conscription and they've got to go, and it has the added bonus of not supporting or investing in Russia?
Well, actually, none of those.
No?
We knew that. Um, so I don't get into politics, right? I don't have citizenship anywhere in the world. So I'm like, whenever people are talking politics, I'm like, can we talk about like the sky is blue?
You don't have
Um,
citizenship anywhere in the world? That's
no,
that's an
I have a
amazing fact.
passport from Latvia.
Yeah.
So I was born in the Soviet Republic of Latvia. And when the
Hmm.
Soviet Union fell, my parents didn't get citizenship because my mom is from Ukraine, my dad's from Belarus. So they're like,
Yeah.
well, you're not local. And
Yeah.
then I have an alien's passport from the country that I was born in. But,
Rogue agent.
yeah, you have no idea what it's like to travel to the US.
Yeah, I
when your
bet.
password causes all of the red flags, right? They scan it and
Mhm.
it goes beep beep beep. Supervisor, special room. But if we look at just the stance there, right? I like to take a logical and practical approach.
Mhm.
There's going to be propaganda, right? There's going to be information bubbles.
Mhm.
There's going to be essentially an ironclad wall that goes down in terms of logistics, right?
Yep.
So people that would not want to leave in the long run, I don't think they would have a career with us, because the cultural shift will just drift apart, right? And then
Interesting.
basic
Yeah.
things like, okay, well, we need to do ray tracing. Oh, we can't ship you a GPU. Oh, your GPU is already dead, and you can't buy a new one, and we can't ship you anything, right?
Yeah.
What are we going to do then? Oh, you know, in February we're like, people are going to get conscribed. So
Yeah.
knowing that, and you can deny it all you want from people who are in that situation, logically that is what will happen. So
Yep.
at any point we might start losing people without warning, right? And
Yeah.
they would be sent away and then not be able to work with us. So all of those things were the primary factor. Like I said, I don't care about politics. I don't care about signaling that, hey, we don't support this, we don't support that.
Yeah.
For me, it's about logic and
Mhm.
practical aspects. So we knew that for the key people, we absolutely had to get everyone out. And
Yep.
then, well, we didn't say that, hey, if you stay in Russia, you're not going to be able to work with us. We're like, long term, it's probably not a great idea. And that's a very difficult conversation to have. So,
Mhm.
to my delight, the vast majority of people were like, yes, we're leaving. Some took a little bit longer than others. Some were able to do day one, but we were able to extract the majority of our workforce into Serbia and also into the European Union for those that were able to get visas
Mhm.
quite fast. And right now we have, just very, very few people in Russia. You can count them on the palm of your hand.
Speaking of information bubbles and cultural differences and things, did you actually encounter many people? The elephant in the room is actually saying to some of your Russian team, or all of them, "Hey, you got to go." Did you have anyone turn around and be pro invasion, or did you have any awkward conversation, extremely awkward conversations, or no conversation
No,
about that?
none,
No.
none. We've during the pandemic we developed a hiring process that um, has a really in-depth personality test that
Hmm.
helps us understand things that you will not be able to understand if it's just like a Zoom interview, right?
Yeah, of
Where it's all
course. Yeah.
virtual. Because like body language and things like that, you can't really tell that based on the camera, and that also allowed us to make sure that people that join us have a wide enough worldview to understand what was going on. So
Interesting.
yeah, we didn't have to have those conversations.
Was that targeted towards the region or the situation? Because I mean, it didn't really develop until like end of 21 in a big way. Or was that just sort of like a happy accident of your personality test that you developed during COVID? That you
Well,
managed to bring people on board who shared values.
I think it's not a happy accident, it's just part of the culture, right? You want
Mm.
to build a localized culture. So I believe that most people that we have will be able to work with any other person in the company, which doesn't usually happen in international companies. You have these buckets of people, like people from this region will be able to work with this region.
Mhm.
Here we were fortunate enough to have a lot of different nationalities in the company.
Yeah, it's amazing how much it helps. Like that's when we talk about diversity in games, or diversity in the workplace. This is all of it. This is what it means being able to think outside of some type of homogenized group think and be able to see things from these different perspectives and have them permeate throughout the culture. Of course.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I've also heard you talk about why what does this for you as a CEO of a company that's obviously invested heavily in Ukraine, which is, as you just mentioned, your mother's birth nation, and then, Russia as well. Now for all of these folks who are actually, because you're not the only company here that's doing this, you're not the only game developer that's done this, that's had to displace their staff or folks who are looking for work. I mean, we all saw it all over LinkedIn and our various channels when it was starting. We still see it sometimes today. What would you say for other folks leading companies or hiring people, or that have the potential to provide work to folks in this region? Welcoming highly skilled Russians or Ukrainians is people mostly, and I'm asking from complete ignorance here, is that mass exodus still happening? Are people still looking for work? Is there a lot of the workforce displaced from the region, or have people largely settled? Like you're saying, your team in Lviv has shipped an update.
So what happened is many companies, especially in Russia, were way too late to react. Or companies that have, like studios in Russia, they're like, it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Like, they're not going to shut down payments. Oh shit, they shut down payments. So many people were just like in wait mode, and then suddenly realized, oh, we can't actually pay people. Okay, shut everything down. So by different estimates, there are between 3,000 and 7,000 people in Russia, highly skilled, that are in need of work. And the way to look at it, I believe, is you win a war by draining the brains of the nation. That's what happened in World War II with some of the best scientists from Germany being recruited by the US. And I believe that governments should follow this, because what happened in the European Union is Russia bad, Russian passport bad, punish Russian passport. And it's kind of like, if you think about it, it's fighting fascism with Nazism in a way. What you should do is the complete opposite, is say, okay, highly skilled, doesn't matter what passport. Oh, you're from Russia? Welcome. Because then you drain the country of its brains, and you give all of these people jobs, and you build a stronger economy for yourself. So why on earth this is not happening, I do not know, but there are many, many people that are looking for work, and also in Ukraine, because a similar thing happened in Ukraine when, if you're running a slightly lower margin business like outsourcing, and you have 5 hours of electricity a day, you're not going to get that many clients maybe, and sustaining that business is difficult. So there have been companies that shut down and people looking for work. Now, the question is, with Russia, it's pretty clear you need to either extract people or deal with visas and whatnot. But with Ukraine, what we've been doing is, we knew that the shelling was going to come eventually, because it's a strategy to kill the civilian infrastructure and have a country freeze without direct combat. So we're like, okay, what do we do in case shit really hits the fan, right? Going from this scenario, which is the mild scenario, where there's bombing of the infrastructure, there's no heating, no gas, and whatnot. That's a mild scenario. The code black scenario is a mushroom cloud, but let's not get into that one yet.
Yeah.
So in the mild scenario, we're like, okay, what can we do, right? What if the city is no power, nothing, and it's deep winter? We bought a couple of vans that we kind of equipped for winter, so that people can be mobile. We bought a whole bunch of camping equipment, and we're like, okay, the goal is to have enough stuff to survive a month of camping in deep Ukrainian winter. That was the goal.
Yeah.
And just a week ago, that came in quite handy when all of the generators, all of the gas heaters and whatnot were used to heat up, space and cook food in Lviv when there was no electricity. Then the second step after that was, okay, if this is happening long term, your pipes will freeze in the house, so you will not get heating again. Your electricity will be kind of useless because you don't have running water. What do we do? So we rented a couple of houses in the surrounding regions around Kyiv, around Lviv, which are fully autonomous, right? That can house dozens of people, so that people can just have a place to stay, get warm, and also we got Starlinks so they can work.
Oh, you do? Okay, right. A bunch of 4G routers, I imagine, as well. Get ready to go and do work.
Well, 4G
Yeah.
goes down in about 5 hours after electricity goes out, as we have learned,
Oh,
because the
interesting.
generator has about 5 hours of electricity.
Are the outages somewhat reliable? Like, is it on a cycle, or is it just like complete chaos? Things can sort of knock out. And are the outages reaching as far as Lviv, or is it mostly in this central Kyiv?
It is reaching Lviv. It's not as predictable as we would like
Yeah.
it to be. But in general, think about it this way: over the past 2 weeks, you
Mhm.
get 5 hours of electricity, and it's below zero outside. Think about what you would do in that situation. That has been the level of comfort that our Ukrainian colleagues are experiencing.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it really is. You don't think. I think for those of us on this side of the world, or away safe and home, in our heated places or in regions where it doesn't get that cold, even it's these are some of the impacts or the consequences or the dangers of these invasions that you don't think about. It might not even be the shelling that is a concern day to day. It can be literally having no heat or having no running water, because running water's been an issue as well, right?
Yeah, it's everything, right? It's all of the
Yeah.
utilities because um, uh, typically heating is done in not like you have your own, like boiler room in your apartment or in your house.
Hmm.
Typically, it's done in a centralized spot somewhere in the city, like somewhere nearby, and then it pumps hot water into the buildings around, right?
Oh
So all you need to
wow.
do
Okay.
is take out that part, right? If it doesn't have
Hmm.
electricity, then you don't have any heating. Same with
Amazing.
hot water as well. It gets heated outside of your building and then pumped
Yeah.
through the region.
Through the building and through the region.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. See, even these small little pieces of context that you just miss over here in Australia, watching the news or even digging into it, as I have to some degree. Hmm. Amazing. And so, what about other studios in the region, Alex? Like, surely it's not like you just only know of tinyBuild in the region, right? And were you talking to other studio heads in the region? Were there collective efforts to mobilize people, or was it folks? Were you just like, we've got our own, and you looked after your own, or were you talking and coordinating with other folks?
Um, we did reach out to other studios, and
Mm.
I guess I'm just a little bit too paranoid about these kind of things.
Mm.
And I can see like how even our own studio heads at one point thought that I was just like a crazy maniac running around screaming with no merit.
Mm.
So it felt like not everyone took this as seriously, and to be honest, I would have also loved it to not be as serious, right? So that
Yeah,
it
of
would just be
course.
like, oh yeah, Alex just sent me a panic email again, haha, very
Mhm.
funny. Um, so it's difficult to take these kind of decisions and then own up to them. But I guess the cheat code that I have is I don't give a crap. I don't as in I don't give a crap about a lot of consequences of my own perception,
Yeah,
right?
you don't care what
Like
people. You don't care if people
yeah,
think you seem like a crazy person if you're out there trying to save lives. Interesting note on that. They often say in things like, say, when something goes down like a mass shooting or something, one of the most dangerous things is people actually not realizing what's happening and not actually processing that, hey, this is, it's not just fireworks, or it's that person isn't just pretending. This is a real life or death situation, and I need to mobilize right now. I need to, for the last 36 years or whatever of my life, I've never had to deal with anything like this, but now is the time to mobilize. Talk to me a little bit, Alex, about what it felt like. If I could just indulge you for a second in having the space to be, thinking about yourself in this situation and being, for especially a lot of our listeners who will be running their own studios or even leading their own teams. You're a sole CEO of, a tinyBuild, which you founded as well. Like, what was it? What was it like having this burden of leadership in the middle of an invasion by armed forces of another nation? And when people think that, is he a bit crazy? Is he over panicked? What was it like having that pressure on your shoulders and working with the team?
um, it It's extremely difficult, right? And difficult part is making objective decisions, right?
Mm.
Because you have so much information flying around you, and different perspectives from a subjective view on the situation.
Yeah.
And the challenge and the goal of leadership is to take all of the information you have and assessing it in an objective way that is beneficial to the priorities that your company has. That's
Mhm.
the most difficult part. And then at the same time, it's about just being there, right?
Yeah.
Being there and not letting your emotions dictate your decisions. I think this really takes a lot of discipline, and I
Mm.
think this is the first time when I realized that, like back in February, I was getting out of shape, and I was like, "Oh shit, I really need to start exercising." And because had I been in better shape myself physically, then mentally I would be able to process it so much better. And we were coming off the pandemic, which was at that point, to me, it was very clear that hey, it's about mental health priorities, no longer
Yeah.
about like actual threat to your physical health.
Mhm.
So it was really, in that whole subject of mental health and figuring out how do I improve myself. And this was like the really, really difficult challenge. The I think the risk here is just to go into alcoholism and smoking and whatnot, and trying to figure
Coping
out how do you,
mechanisms.
yeah, yeah. And at that point, like I just think that physical health is so important. So you
Mm.
need to have like some sort of hobby that you can go swimming, running, whatever, like some sort of physical exercise that is able to help you reset your brain. Because for me,
Mm.
that was running at that point. I would just like like overweight running is not fun, but I
Yeah.
did that.
No, it is
You
not.
just
Yeah.
you just reset your brain and you set your priorities straight. So
Yeah.
it's about like that balance, right? Because it's very easy just to sit there in front of a monitor and just be obsessed over it all day
Mm.
long, and at one point become unproductive.
Yeah. And was this something, and I'm taking it from what you've just said that is the running was something that you'd been neglecting exercise. And then when this happened, you were like, I need this. And you got into it when this was happening. You're actually, I actually, regardless of what's going on right now, I need to go out for a run. I
Yeah,
need this thing to reset. I also want to challenge you a little
absolutely.
bit on the notion of making objective decisions, right? Because naturally, as a leader, it's like as you've said yourself, you're viewing everything through this subjective lens. Was there a part of you that had to sort of let go or of this notion of objective decisions, especially with so much weight and people's lives for the first time ever, potentially making video games, right? Like people's lives in your hands and mobilizing hundreds of people across two nations or more. Was there a part of you that just had to come to grips with the fact that you are making subjective decisions, and were there some calls where you just had to say to the team, this is what's happening, objective decision, this is what I feel we need to do?
I feel like the most important part of that decision making was um, not falling in love with your decision.
Hmm.
It's about taking information as it goes and then augmenting your decision based on new information, should that
Yeah.
new information come in. So I always told people in meetings, okay, it's fine. Yes, Russia is really bad. Like, fuck Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any new information right now? Like, this is the direction that we're going with. Is there anything new that has happened? If not, then we're sticking with this decision. If yes,
Yeah.
let's discuss.
Yeah.
And you can't sit on decisions. This is something that I found myself doing a lot, especially in terms of like people decisions and whatnot. Is just sitting on decisions, right? Just waiting. In that situation, you can't. You just you make a snap decision and you stick with it unless you have new information.
Yeah. Yeah. Just commit to those decisions, but be willing to change them. So you also touched on mental health and your own mental health through this and things that you needed to do, clearing your head, making sure that you're physically in shape and the weight of all of this. But we've gone through, obviously, in the heat of mobilizing everyone and getting everyone into their proper places and folks out of Russia and things. But now you've got teams settled, working on the games. Tell me a little bit about the long-term mental health implications of something like this. It's, people have lost their homes or have been displaced from them. I'm sure tragically that some of your team have been affected by friends or family injured or perished throughout
Mhm.
this, this horrible invasion. What are you seeing at the studio now, and how are you helping people through that?
So we've actually, in the beginning of the pandemic, we invested into essentially internal services that are like on demand with HR, on
Yeah,
just
like an
having
employee
counseling.
assistance program. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, just if you want to talk to a professional, just let us know. We'll pay for it. So that was step one. Here, the long term implications we will not know until the time comes.
Hmm.
But it's really about the support and that feeling of community, and making sure that people are talking to each other, right? Because in an office situation, you have the water cooler conversations. You go, oh yeah, I just did this on the weekend. Oh, you're into that as well. Yeah, cool. So building that trust between employees is really, really important. And here, once people have gone through life-threatening situations together, you need
Hmm.
to facilitate that relationship and make sure that it grows within the teams. So that's really what we're focused on. And in terms of mental health, I believe it all comes down to the feeling of community, that feeling that you're part of something larger. Because as much as many people say, oh, I am an introvert, no, you're not. Come on, we're social beings by
We're
design.
social creatures. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when it's a normal situation, like non-pandemic, right? Okay, you wake up, you go to the office, you have to brush your teeth, you have to change your clothes, otherwise you're not presentable, right?
Hmm.
And that kind of routine really helps a lot of people. And when people kind of like roll out of bed, you're at your PC, and do that for a few months straight, then
Yep.
it does impact your mental health and also your physical health, because those are completely connected.
That's
Um,
interesting. I want to drill into that for a second because I know at D.I.C.E. Europe this year, it was one of the conversations that was happening
mhm,
across the conference was, this shift from, for some studios from hybrid to now requesting people to go into the studio, for cultural reasons or for the reasons that you've spoken about before. And obviously there are a vast number of studios that are still, fully work from home or remotely or are fully hybrid, totally flexible there. But there are a number of studios that are actually making the move back into the office space, and often as well for what they perceive to be, the employees or the communities or the culture or greater good for their studio. So you found, and I guess we haven't really spoken about this, right? But I mean, are you saying that everyone in Lviv is like going into an office? People aren't working from home, quote unquote, in this situation. And
absolutely.
part of this coming together in an office is, a big part of that cultural and communal recovery.
Absolutely. I'm a strong believer that going to the office is the best thing you can do for your own personal life, for your own health. And after long, long discussions, it all comes down to convenience, right? Because people who advocate for remote work may understand that they may even agree with the fact that going to the office is more productive, but in if you've moved out of like an expensive state to live in,
Mhm.
and are now remote, of course it's going to be inconvenient to go back to the office, right?
Yep.
And for us, it's been pretty clear that for relationships in the company that have been established pre-pandemic, those relationships survive this remote transition, right? But forging new relationships remotely is extremely difficult. Just
Mhm.
building that trust factor between people, because you can schedule all of the Zoom brainstorming calls you want, but that one idea you had over beers on a Friday after work, that's the
Mhm.
idea that drives a company forward. So I'm a strong believer that people need to get together. And for us, it's been okay, if people are in the same location, go to the office. People have been going to the office in Belgrade, in Latvia, in the Netherlands, and we're now figuring out what to do in the US because, like I said, everyone moved around the US.
Yeah, of
Um,
course. Yeah.
So going forward, for our, like, we call them work groups, a bunch of
Hmm.
people who are remote in different locations. We just last weekend we had the get together. A
Yeah.
bunch of people flew out and we walked around a whole bunch, talked, and then had a strategy session that is going to define the direction of the company for the next 2 years.
Amazing. Speaking of that community spirit as well, a fantastic book I read actually during COVID. It was like one of the best books to read during lockdown because it was just so positive. It was Rutger Bregman's Humankind, and in this he speaks about the resilience of the spirit of folks and the amount of community during the shellings that the Germans were doing on Britain in World War II. And I was just listening to a podcast today, hearing quite remarkable stories that in some ways are counter to cultural norms of Ukraine in particular ways, where the amount of community that folks are and resilience that is just coming out of this experience is quite phenomenal. Have you seen something? I imagine you've seen something similar. Like, you've seen people no doubt at their very best throughout this, of the human condition throughout this experience.
Well, most definitely, right? In a situation of extreme stress, there needs to be an outlet, and our Ukrainian colleagues have been showing that in terms of resilience and real determination, right?
Mm.
At the same time, I'm kind of like the downer in that situation. I'm like, okay, yes, we'll get Crimea back, and let's also prepare for a really harsh winter, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's get those blankets, let's get those
Yeah.
Starlinks and whatnot. Because resilience is one thing, stamina and the war of attrition is a
Mm.
whole other ball game. Because, go ahead.
Well, let's talk about that because we've been talking about the leading up to the invasion.
Mhm.
We've spoken about the mobilization. We've spoken about the status quo now in the studio, but the war is still raging, so to speak.
Mhm.
How are you, tinyBuild, viewing this situation? Is it an open-ended thing? Like, how are you actually planning now for the future?
Well, we're planning with, obviously with margins of error, but it's
Hmm.
about the same priorities, right? How do we make sure that people are alive, are able to be productive, are safe? Um, and some of the plans we already talked about, right? Like,
Yeah.
the code black plan of get into a van and live in the forest for a month,
Yeah.
the housing situation. And really from there, it's about how do we predict this
Hmm.
and over prepare. Right, so some of the things that we're talking about this week will be relevant in 2 or 3 months, in January, February,
Yeah.
because in the depth of winter, like I'm in the Netherlands right now, and here they
Hmm.
have a phenomena called the Blue Monday, which is the last Monday of January, which is when suicide rates go up. They just spike
Yeah,
because
like
long
like
winter,
seasonal
right?
affective disorder as well. Yeah.
Yes, lack of
Mm.
vitamin D and whatnot. So here I am, outside of my duties, just telling people, take your goddamn vitamins. Have you taken your vitamin D today? Things like that. They don't
Preparing,
seem like
yes.
big things, but they are really, really important. And
Yeah.
just keeping an eye out for signs of people being not happy. I mean, obviously, how happy can you be? But
Mm.
feeling like they're contributing, feeling that they are making progress, that they are having a positive impact. That's a really good feeling. And
Yeah.
I really want people to focus on what they can impact
Mm.
versus just sitting there and being angry, which doesn't achieve much.
Yeah. Just to provide some context for our listeners as well, in January and February, the temperatures in Ukraine can reach anywhere between, lows of 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, or what's that, like 5 to 10 degrees Celsius or something. So it's minus 5
Way
to 10
below
degrees
freezing. Yeah.
Celsius. Yeah, way below freezing. So it's not a nice winter, that's for sure. Hmm. So we've spoken about how many folks you had. So just to go back to it, you had over 100 folks, or approximately 100 in Russia. You had 80 or so, you were saying, in Ukraine. How many people are still remaining in Ukraine right now, in Lviv? And then also, how many people do you have in Kyiv still?
So Kiev is flexible because the people who relocate to Lviv, some of them left back to Kiev, but are now
Hmm.
like going back to Lviv. So
Yeah, moving back and
I'd
forth.
say it's about 50 people in total that are still
Hmm.
in Ukraine that would not be able to leave in the short term,
Yeah.
spread between Kiev and Lviv, and that the spread is being flexible based on the situation. Because just very recently, the mayor of Kiev said, "Well, it might be a good idea to leave Kiev because there's not going to be any water or electricity or heating."
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. And so, what are you seeing from other studios as well in the region? Have you seen, just in general? Obviously, you can't speak for other studio heads here, but have how has the industry, the region, the regional industry, sort of gone through this? I mean, has it been completely ravaged? As you said, you shipped updates still, like you've got some crew still there. What's it looking like for the video games industry and studios there?
So it's difficult for me to speak without firsthand experience.
Yeah.
What I can speak to is some of the people that we've hired were they really wanted to work with us because we were pretty transparent about what was going on and what we were doing,
Mhm.
while they were sitting there waiting for their own management to do anything, and
Yeah.
then studios would just shut down. That to me is completely unacceptable,
Mm.
and that's not how you treat people, because in a time sensitive situation you need to act. Now, other companies have done quite well, and we're actually able to get ahead and do things like rent charter buses, right? So that right before the invasion began, they would
Mhm.
just load everyone onto a bus and get them to safety. Other companies were able to even extract people before the law kicked in that if you're male, you can't leave.
Yeah.
So it's a mixed bag of results, I guess, and I'm happy to talk to other studios about this as well. What I am curious about is, in general, the rate of production, because
Mm.
many people are still there, many companies are still there. Is how do you go around, like having 5 hours of electricity per day? And I know that many companies are doing what we're doing with generators, with like centralized spaces, with things like that. Um, how long can you be productive in that environment, though? That is the big question.
Yeah, I heard a story, a report from Kiev, just an anecdote from, I think it was a journalist with the Telegraph, who was talking about a guy who works in IT in Kiev. And he has meetings that he just absolutely has to be at. And so he's built up some little alliances or deals with other folks and other companies around Kiev who have generators. And so whenever he loses power, he can actually just go from one to another to make sure that he actually makes his meetings. It's amazing, some of the resourcefulness to just for folks to, and in the face of an invasion, and you're in the capital city that's experiencing shelling and other things, and you're worried about making your IT securities meeting and forming alliances to get stuff done. It's incredible. Have you seen this spirit and this, this resilience? Again, we were talking about your teams outside of Russia and Ukraine. Has it inspired other people? I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like watching your coworkers. And do you operate on Slack or anything? Is this, are people having conversations? Is there an inspiration sort of, and this culture and this community spirit seeping out into the rest of the world and tinyBuild via a Slack group or something?
Yeah, there is Slack. There are many other messengers that people use. It's definitely helped people appreciate their
Mm.
situations more because when I moved to the US, especially Seattle area, everyone's like running around complaining and being kind of like angry and burned out. That was my
Mm.
impression of the West Coast in general. Whereas when you realize what you have and appreciate it, it makes you much more happy within, right?
Mhm.
Because if you find happiness within, then anxiety, depression, all of those things go away, right?
Yeah.
Happiness comes from within. So I think this situation helped a lot of people understand and value what they really truly have, and
Mm.
reprioritize their lives. while also helping their colleagues. Um, yeah, because we really like as human beings, like whenever you reach like a new level of salary or whatever, you kind of go, okay, now where's the next step, right?
Yeah.
And
What
then
else am I deficient in?
yeah, and I've noticed this especially in the US with the whole subject of burnout and things like that, is that people don't just stop for a second and go like, okay, this is nice. I'm just going
Mhm.
to sit here, enjoy this for a while. No, people just keep on running for the next thing, and that's really what annoys me in our industry in general.
Yeah, and so yeah, it is. It's something to talk to. It's definitely something of note in video games. So a lot of folks are, looking at what their next lead title on getting that lead title, or what their next big project is, or their move to a new studio, or things like that. And so it's really, really amazing to hear about the gratitude that it sounds like some of the folks from tinyBuild from around the world were, given a hot dose of gratitude, seeing what their colleagues have gone through and the resilience there. So, what challenges lie ahead for tinyBuild, Alex? With this, you've got a you just IPO'd last year. You've got a publicly run company that and then you've got folks now. You've mobilized everyone out of Ukraine and Russia. You've got a war raging with 50 folks still in that country. What are the challenges, both because of what's going on in Ukraine, and then just for tinyBuild as a company?
Well, I think the challenge. I always like to say this because it's a different perspective. Like
Mm-hmm.
people say in game development, you have code problems, animation problems, production problems. No, they're only human problems. Like
Yeah.
they're nothing else. If you solve the human problem, then you've solved business.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, it's about how do we make sure that our people are safe, happy, and able to be productive. That's really the big challenge. And going into winter, all the things we talked about are obviously quite challenging. And then in general, for us, it's about um, kind of discovering this new intellectual property. Because right now we have a couple of franchises, right, from a business side.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make sure that the intellectual properties we're investing into, and right now we have about 30 in development, have a chance to, well, A, find an audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
B, become profitable, and then C, spawn more products within that IP. That's
Yeah.
really what we are going through on a daily basis. And because the big thing about this industry, if you look at the top 10 games, they generate 90% of the revenue, but they're the
Their
top 10 games.
franchises.
And
Yeah.
all of them are going to be, 5, 10, 20 years old as
Mm-hmm.
franchises,
Yeah. Yeah.
with the odd exception every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how do you operate in that environment, right? It's a consolidating industry. Um, and it's a balance of investing into new things, investing into things that work, and enabling people to be able to make decisions really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one of the big challenges from an organizational point of view, because typically when you have a small company, like you have your production, you have your marketing, you have your QA services, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
When you grow, those people will grow departments, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
were the first marketing person, therefore you're the head of marketing. It makes
Yeah.
sense. When you hit about 50 or 70 people in organization, those initially critical heads of departments suddenly become bottlenecks. And that's when
Mm-hmm.
people typically refer to like, oh, like remember when the company was lean and mean and we could make decisions? Is because decisions become burdened by bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And that is what I really hate. I really hate redundant process. I really don't like it when something is being done that doesn't need to be done. I hate it when people are in meetings that are not productive. So I'm like one of those assholes in the room that will ask, are, what are you trying to achieve here,
Yeah.
right?
Put this up
Please
in an
go
email.
do actual work, right? I'll
Yeah.
sit in this meeting while you do actual work. So when you look at that, the challenge is how do you make small groups of people responsible for the products that they're working on and enable them to make fast decisions based on the information that they have. And it's okay to be wrong. It's totally okay to be wrong. It's not okay to sit idle waiting for a decision to be made. Because
Yeah.
I'm not going to make a decision based on product. I don't know the product as well as the person working on it.
It's almost more important to be able to move fast and be wrong in those smaller, and then to learn from those mistakes, have the freedom to move and experiment.
Yep.
Interesting. It is also interesting, really, and I've heard you speak about this before, Alex, is tinyBuild's focus on franchises, because it isn't something that you typically see from a quote unquote, I know you're not a super fan of this phrase, but an indie publisher, for example, right? That this notion of building a franchise around independent titles can sometimes be antithetical to it. Do you find it a challenge? Do you have any trouble finding independent development partners that want to enter a long-term partnership with you and want to build franchises?
It feels like that's the dream for mostly everyone until they're done with their first game. And this is where really when, because you work on something for 2, 3, 5 years, right?
Yeah.
You're so sick of that world, those characters. You just want to ship it and do something else. And this is the major problem and oxymoron with this whole equation.
Yep.
You have just created something that probably made some money because it's able to fund your next project, and then you move on to another IP that is not proven to be successful, but you feel like since you've already had success that you will succeed in that one. That's why there are so many names in the industry that are known for one thing, right? Even though they did 20 things. Now the challenge is, how do you build an infrastructure where, let's say you found that one thing, you've shipped it, it becomes a big IP. How do you scale that? And we went through kind of in hindsight, it all sounds planned, but it was kind of done in the moment. When the original Hello Neighbor, our biggest franchise right now, was shipping in 2017, at that same time, we already kickstarted development on the multiplayer spin-off I mentioned and on a prequel. So there are 2 more projects in development. Shortly after, we kickstarted development on a book series, and that book series went on to sell over 4 million copies. More than most games sell.
And just to be clear in regards to what you're saying too, those 2 projects that you kickstarted weren't with the initial Hello Neighbor studio, right? Like one of them was Hologryph, right? That they did Secret Neighbor. That was one of those 2 projects, yeah?
And the other one was the original studio, but it was a different direction. Right? For it was narrative driven versus thriller. And this then leads us to today, which is kind of belated with the pandemic and whatnot. But about 4 years ago, we sat down with our creative director and thought, okay, how can we sell games, right? We have an IP, how can we sell more copies? So we looked back at the 90s and we're like, okay, well, what are the most known characters from the 90s? And you think, okay, well, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were quite good, right? Or Transformers, or G.I. Joe, and then we realize we're talking about toys that were being sold to us by cartoons. And then we're like, okay, what if we make a cartoon to sell games?
You have a pilot for something, don't you?
Yes, so 2 years ago, we released we called it a test pilot, where we were like, okay, let's try to do an animated series ourselves. Let's see where the bottlenecks are, how this production works. Long story short, we made something that we rate ourselves as a 3 out of 10, a really solid 3 out of 10.
But you learned a lot, I'm sure, right?
But it got over 20 million views on our own YouTube channel, right?
Holy
so
shit.
we're like, okay, there's a market.
Yeah.
And it spiked the sales of the game as well. And we're like, okay, so what did we learn? That even a crappy TV show is able to move the needle. What if we make a really, really good TV show and actually invest into it? So that is going to be the question that we'll figure out in just a couple of weeks when Hello Neighbor 2 launches alongside the actual animated series, which is going to be canon. And we'll test the theory if really good cartoons can sell video games. And the more exciting part about this is that, to my knowledge, it's never been done when the creative on the linear part is also the same creative that's on the interactive part. So you have the game and the cartoon kind of I guess, morphing together in storyline.
Yeah. And that's what's happening on the creative is the same one
Yeah.
for both? Amazing.
Yeah,
And so
we've had shared creative leads on that.
amazing. And so this is in 2 weeks, am I right? Or something like that. December 6th, you're releasing.
Yes, so we're launching Hello Neighbor 2 on December 6th. And when will this podcast launch? I guess after that, right?
Yeah, it'll be
Most
probably
likely.
after that, I imagine. Yeah. So it's
Yeah,
probably
so
out now if you're listening to this.
so what's going to happen is when the game launches, people will be wondering, where the hell is the animated series? Like, where is it? And very soon in the game, they'll discover that there is a TV set with a countdown. And then when the countdown lands, you'll be able to watch the TV show within the game. And
That's
that's kind of like the
amazing.
big plot twist. It's happening within Hello Neighbor 2 and within Secret Neighbor, which is that multiplayer spinoff.
Yeah.
So we expect that people will be flipping out because this has never been done before. Like the closest thing is that Fortnite did a concert, but
Yeah.
an anime series just randomly in a screen. Of course, it will be on YouTube a couple of days later, but we really want players to like experience it within the game because
Yeah,
it
that's
feels like a
beautiful.
weird experience.
Yeah, totally. It reminds me of, I remember playing The Darkness, by Starbreeze years ago. And I think I watched all of To Kill a Mockingbird or something in that was playing
Yep.
on the TV. Yeah,
Yep.
that's fascinating. Look, it's so impressive, Alex, to think about yourself and obviously the other talented folk you have there at tinyBuild. I've just being in the indie scene myself, I've seen you go from just like, an orange hat or two at a conference through to, and finding a lanyard in my pocket, afterwards, through to, obviously your huge booths. I love the carnival this year at PAX, by the way.
Thank you.
Fantastic idea. At PAX West, everyone this year, tinyBuild built a carnival with like amusement, not rides, what are they called? Games, parlor games and things like this. Yeah, a sideshow alley. It was absolutely, it was great. It was, and the vibe there was awesome. Also tackling some bigger games. I've for the first time there I saw as well. And it seems like what you've been tackling before. It's just so great to see you going from strength to strength, such a successful IPO last year as well. And then to think that while all of this is happening, that you're dealing with, with the largest war in Europe in 70 years or something like that. It's quite remarkable what you and your team are achieving, and what you're doing for your team over there and your employees. So my hat goes off to you, Alex. Thank you so much for coming here today, sharing your story. I wish only the best for you and your team, and hopefully, as we all hope, this conflict finds its way to a peaceful resolution, and all of your wonderful employees find themselves back at home.
Well, looking forward to D.I.C.E in Ukraine, Crimea at some point.
Yeah, right. D.I.C.E Ukraine. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Alex. And hey, yeah, by the time this has come out, congrats on Hello Neighbor 2. I'm sure it'll probably be out by the time this podcast goes. If not, actually give us a plug. It's available on almost every platform, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to come out on consoles and Steam and on our own website and wherever else you can find it. It's the highly anticipated sequel to the original Hello Neighbor, 5 years in development, done with with love from people all over the world, especially Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone, it's a fantastic way to obviously support the team members that you heard about today on the podcast. So go out and grab a copy. All right. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you so much.